everybody. So this is very strange. I can't quite get used to it, but regardless, it's such an exciting night, and it's my first time sort of with the Zoom, so I hope I don't, whatever. Jen, you keep me under control. I'm so excited tonight because, and I was just talking to Mona and Quan about this, that I felt, until tonight anyway, I felt like a little bit of a genius thinking about having these two together because their books are so simpatico in so many wonderful ways. And they're two of the most original books that I have read in recent memory, and two of the most exciting and funny and bananas, bizarre, just delightful books that I've read, and they have so many interesting overlapping things in common, which one, if you don't already know, just as a little bit, I'll let you two, introduce but your own books, but one is sort of about a coven of MFA writing students with powers of enchantment involving rabbits, and the other one is about a coven of high school field hockey players with the powers of enchantment deriving from Emilio Estevez. And so if that doesn't pique your interest, I don't know what will. But let me start. We decided that we'll go in alphabetical order. So, which, is A and B here. We'll start with Mona. Mona Awad, it's my pleasure to introduce her. Mona Awad was born in Montreal and has lived in the US since 2009. Her debut novel, 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, was published by Penguin in 2016 and won the Amazon Best First Novel Award and the Colorado Book Award. It was also shortlisted for the Giller Prize and the Arab American Book Award, and longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Award for Humor and the International Dublin Award. Her second novel, Bunny, was published by Viking in June 2019 and was named a Best Book of 2019 by Time, Vogue, Electric Literature, and the New York Public Library. Her writing has also appeared in McSweeney's, Time Magazine, Electric Literature, Vice, The Walrus, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
She earned an MFA in fiction from Brown University and an MS, I don't even know what this degree is. MSCR? What is an MSCR?
It's like a master's in English, but it's just a very research-focused master's where you just write a dissertation and you don't take classes.
Oh, okay. Okay, but I like your dissertation in English with the dissertation. That was University of Edinburgh, and her dissertation was on fear in the fairy tale. Yeah. If you read Bunny, you'll understand that. Yeah. She recently completed a PhD in creative writing and English literature at the University of Denver. She was an instructor in the Literary Arts Department at Brown University and the English Department at the University of Denver, and currently lives in Boston. And we're so happy to have you here from Boston without having to drive. Yeah, seriously. As for her new novel, Bunny, which is just out in paperback, Dwight Garner of the New York Times writes, "Every time I open it up, I stumble upon a crackling sentence." The Los Angeles Times writes, "Awad has proved herself one of the most innovative and original authors out there, and Bunny is a wild, audacious, and ultimately unforgettable novel." I get a little carried away with the quotes. The New Yorker calls it a work of toothsome and fanged intelligence, wickedly hilarious. And the Washington Post calls it deliciously evil. Awad is a stone cold genius. I just love that quote. I think it's so great. So I first heard about Bunny from, it was a couple of years ago, before it came out, from my literary agent, actually. We were just talking about upcoming books, and he described this book to me. He said it's about this group of MFA students who use their, use magic to violently turn rabbits into the men of their dreams. And I said, send it to me right now. They put it in the envelope right now. I need to read this book. And so I got the advanced copy, and I was on my way. I took the train up to Boston for a book event. My second novel came out my second book came out right around the same time. So I happened to be reading Bunny. I went up to this event, and Mona was at the event, and I just went up to her. I don't even know if I introduced myself. I'm just like, I'm obsessed with your book. And I've been, when I talk to people about it, the term that I use for it is brilliantly bananas, because that's really encapsulates this book. It's wild, it's wildly funny, skewering saccharine girl groups, pretentious writing programs and my own alma mater, hilariously. And Jennifer's also. I toes the line where reality and creativity, sanity and insanity meet and blur, and that's sort of my sweet spot myself, which interests me very much. What happens when the power of the imagination is too strong for one mind to harness? And yeah, and with that, I will leave you here to Mona, if you don't mind reading from Bunny.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that awesome introduction. And yeah, we met that year that both our books came out. Our books came out the same day, actually. Both came out June 11th of last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was such a huge fan of the Paper Wasp, so it was kind of a perfect, it was just like a perfect match, and we actually did a few events together, and yeah, I adore your work, Lauren, so that really means a lot to me that you connected with Bunny. And so cool too to be doing an event with Quan, because we did an event together in the spring, and I had the pleasure of reading We Ride Upon Sticks in March, and it was just so wonderful. And there are so many parallels between our novels, so it's really just a total joy to be doing this event with you too. Yeah, and thanks so much to Hudson Valley Writers for hosting us as well, and to Jennifer. So I'm gonna read from Bunny, and I'm gonna read from two sections. I'll read from the opening, and then I'll read a little bit from the middle. So just for some more context, Bunny is a novel that is set at a New England college, and it's about a clique of MFA students, all female, a cohort who call each other Bunny and who move and speak as one. And the story is told from the perspective of an outsider student named Samantha. And Samantha hates the bunnies, but she gets drawn into their clique in spite of herself. And then things get really kind of dark and magical and weird, and rabbits are involved. And I'll go into that a little bit later when I read from the middle. But that's just to set up the start. And then the book begins in the fall, and it's like around the first week of school, and there's a college party, and Samantha's seeing the bunnies for the first time after a summer apart, and she's feeling all the feelings. So that's where it begins, and that's where I'll read from. We call them bunnies because that is what they call each other. Seriously, Bunny. Example. Hi, Bunny. Hi, Bunny. What did you do last night, Bunny? I hung out with you, Bunny. Remember, Bunny? That's right, Bunny. You hung out with me, and it was the best time I ever had. Bunny, I love you. I love you, Bunny. And then they hug each other so hard, I think their chests are going to implode. I would even secretly hope for it from where I sat, stood, leaned in the opposite corner of the lecture hall, department lounge, auditorium, bearing witness to 4 grown women, my academic peers, wooingly strangle each other hello, or goodbye, or just because you're so amazing, Bunny. How fiercely they gripped each other's pink and white bodies, forming a hot little circle of such rib-crushing love and understanding, it took my breath away. And then the nuzzling of ski-jump noses, peach fuzzy cheeks, temples pressed against temples in a way that made me think of the labial rubbing of the bonobo or the telepathy of beautiful, murderous children in horror films. All 8 of their eyes shut tight as if this collective asphyxiation were a kind of religious bliss. All 4 of their glossy mouths making squealing sounds of monstrous love that hurt my face. I love you, Bunny. I quietly prayed for the hug implosion all year last year, that their ardent squeezing might cause the flesh to ooze from the sleeves, neck holes, and A-line hems of their cupcake dresses like so much inane frosting, that they would get tangled in each other's Game of Thrones hair, choked by the ornate braids they were forever braiding into each other's heart-shaped little heads, that they would choke on each other's blandly grassy perfume. Never happened, not once. They always came apart from these embraces intact and unwounded, despite the ill will that poured forth from my staring eyes like so much comic book villain venom, smiling at one another, swinging clasped hands, skins aglow with affection and belonging as though they'd just been hydrated by the purest of mountain streams. Bunny, I love you. Completely immune to the disdain of their fellow graduate student me, Samantha Heather Mackey, who is not a bunny, who will never be a bunny. I pour myself and Ava more free champagne in the far corner of the tented green, where I lean against a white Doric pillar bedecked with billowing tulle. September, Warren University, the Narrative Arts Department's annual Welcome Back Demi-Toss, because this school is too Ivy and New England to call a party a party. I stand here, I sway here, full of tepid sparkling and animal livers and whatever hard alcohol Ava keeps pouring from her drink me flask into my plastic cup. What's in this again, I ask? Just drink it, she says. I observe from behind borrowed sunglasses as the women whom I must call my colleagues reunite after a summer spent apart in various trying locales, such as remote tropical islands, the south of France, the Hamptons. I watch their fervent little bodies lunge for each other in something like rapture. Nails the color of natural poisons, digging into each other's forearms with the force of what I keep telling myself is feigned, surely feigned affection. Shiny lips parting to call each other by their communal pet name. Jesus, are they for real? Ava whispers in my ear now. She has never seen them up close, didn't believe me when I first told her about them last year, said there is no way grown women act like that. You're making this up, Smacky. Over the summer, I started to think I had too. It is a relief in some ways to see them now, if only to confirm I am not insane. Yes, I say, too real. I watch her survey them through her fishnet veil, her David Bowie eyes filled with horror and boredom, her mouth an unimpressed red line. Can we go now? I can't leave yet, I say, my eyes still on them. They've pulled apart from one another at last, their tweed dresses not even rumpled, their shiny heads of hair not even disturbed, their skins glowing with health insurance as they all crouch down in unison to collectively coo at a professor's ever-jumping shih tzu. Why? I told you, I have to make an appearance. Ava looks at me, slipping drunkenly down the pillar. I have said hello to no one. Not the poets, who are their own fresh grunty hell. Not the new incoming fiction writers who are laughing awkwardly by the shrimp tower. Not even Benjamin, the friendly administrator, to whom I usually cling at these sorts of functions, helping him dollop quivering offal onto dried bits of toast. Not my workshop leader from last spring Fosco, or any other member of the esteemed faculty. And how was your summer, Sarah? And how's the thesis coming, Sasha? Asked with polite indifference, getting my name wrong, always. Whatever response I offer, an earnest confession of my own imminent failure, a bald-faced lie that sets my face aflame, will elicit the same knowing nod, the same world-weary smile, a delivery of platitudes about the process being elusive, the work being a difficult mistress. Trust, Sasha. Patience, Sarah. Sometimes you have to walk away, Serena. Sometimes, Stephanie, you have to seize the bull by the horns. This evening, all I have done in terms of socializing is half smile at the one the bunnies call Psycho Jonah, my social equivalent among the poets, who is standing alone by the punch, smiling beatifically in his own antidepressant-fueled fever dream. Ava sighs and lights a cigarette with one of the many tea lights that dot our table. She looks back at the bunnies who are now stroking each other's arms with their small, small hands. I miss you, Bunny, they say to each other in their fake little girl voices, even though they are standing right fucking next to each other, and I can taste the hate in their hearts like iron on my tongue. I miss you, Bunny. This summer was so hard without you. I barely wrote a word. I was so, so sad. Let's never, ever part again, please. Ava laughs out loud at this, actually laughs, throws her feathery head back, doesn't bother to cover her mouth with her gloved hand. It's a delicious, raucous sound, ringing in the air like the evening's missing music. Shh, I hiss at her, but it's already done. The laughter causes the one I call the Duchess to turn her head of long silver fairy witch locks in our direction. She looks at us, first at Ava, then at me, then at Ava again. She is surprised, perhaps, to see that for once I'm not alone, that I have a friend. Ava meets her look with wide open eyes, the way I do in my dream stares. Ava's gaze is formidable and European. She continues to smoke and sip my champagne without breaking eye contact. The Duchess, in turning toward us, causes a ripple effect of turning among the other bunnies. First Cupcake looks over, then Creepy Doll with her tiger eyes, then Vignette with her lovely Victorian skull face, her stoner mouth wide open. They each look at Ava, then at me in turn, scanning down from our heads to our feet, their eyes taking us in like little mouths sipping strange drinks. As they do, their noses twitch, their 8 eyes do not blink, but stare and stare. Then they look back at the Duchess and lean into each other, their lip-glossed mouths forming whispery words. Ava squeezes my arm hard. The Duchess turns and arches an eyebrow at us. She raises a hand up. Is there an invisible gun in it? No. It's an empty, open hand, with which she then waves. At me, with something like a smile on her face. Hi, her mouth says. My hand shoots up of its own accord before I can even stop myself. I'm waving and waving and waving. Hi, I'm saying with my mouth, even though no sound comes out. Then the rest of the bunnies hold up a hand and wave too. We're all waving at one another from across the great shores of the tented green, except Ava. She continues to smoke and stare at them like they're a four-headed beast. When at last I lower my hand, I turn to her. She's looking at me like I'm something worse than a stranger. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead a little to the middle. Samantha has been sucked into the clique. She is now with the bunnies, and they are speaking as one voice. And here's the thing, and it's not like, you know, it's not a plot spoiler, I don't think at this point. But what the bunnies are doing together, this thing that they're doing in their you know, little group, in their clique, is they're conjuring men out of bunnies violently. So these bunny men are kind of like the product of their work off campus. That's what they're doing. It's their creative project. It's you know, it's like a psychosexual project. It's a lot. There's a lot of weight around this project that they're doing. And Samantha is now into the bunny making as well. We huddle hug on the velvety green among the cherry blossom trees. We link arms. We close our eyes the better to feel each other's bodies. We form a hot little circle of love and understanding. We press our faces into our faces, our cheeks against our cheeks, our eyelashes tickling our skins like little hummingbird wings, like bunny nose twitches. Oh, bunny, I love you. I love you, bunny. We cannot say how long we have been here hugging like this, because it is that time of day when we thank each other for breathing. Post-workshop hug time. A hug to take away all of our owies. The ones that come with sharing your story, aka soul, in a classroom setting. Though today, we really don't need one. We were so brilliant in the cave today. We were such bright, shining lights. We were so the daughters of Wolf, you should have seen us. In fact, halfway through the class, we had to put on sunglasses to shield our eyes from how bright our stars were. We told each other, Bunny, you are so brilliant. You are so famous and waiting. Can we have your autograph now, please? The poets, aka the reptile people, pass us huddle hugging on the green. They are getting out of their own workshop with their professor Silky, who wants to have sex with us so badly and has made this known in so many silky, nonverbal ways. The poets are on their way to get beers in the basement bar across the street, which smells of stale kegs and fake cheese. They stare at us with judgy eyes as they pass, grunting nobly in their fake poor clothes. They think we are such stupid girls. Fuck you, poets. You think you are so smart, so cool with your word art. You have no idea. Can you conjure hybrid spaces? Can you perform the body and have the body perform literally? Can you make a Viking masseuse, a pre-TB Keats, a talkie Tim Riggins? Can you make a bunny explode with the combined force of your 8 eyes? 10, bunny, your eyes too. It is so amazing to see the bunny explode, by the way. We are barely even grossed out anymore. Now we light a cigarette with the guts still in our hair, and we lean against Bunny's bloody shoulder, and we wait for the knock on the door. It is so amazing when we hear the knock-knock sound. It is so amazing to see a boy of flesh smiling at us where a bunny used to be. Hello, Samantha, he'll say. Tell me everything. Not a boy, Bunny, remember, a hybrid or a darling or a draft, we keep telling you. It makes us feel a little like God. No, we can't go that far. In fact, we are a little fearful of God right now, if he's out there. She, Bunny, if she's out there. Or it. We like to think of it more as an energy. And don't worry, it would approve, so approve, of us. Because look at what we just did. Look at him. So what if they all look the same? Like Cape Cod in boy form. Sometimes like the classic film stars or fairy tale princes of yesteryear. So what if they all say the same things? Tell me everything. Your beauty is like screaming, like Proust, like a Frenchy film complete with soundtrack. You're a daughter of Wolf. So what if anatomically there are some things missing? Essential things like hands, genitals, an untwisted mouth, possibly a soul. Still, it's a good start. We'll get better. In the meantime, look. He is holding an orchid just for us, which, if we take it from him quickly, he won't eat first. He is brushing our hair, doing it so tenderly. He doesn't mean to wrap the brush handle against our scalp at all. He is painting strange flowers and blobby birds on our fingernails. He is saying we are so beautiful and wild like the black moors of the Brontes. He is saying our talents are as deep as the North Sea. He is saying, love your dress. He is saying, Pinkberry, would you like some? He is helping us in the kitchen to make Light and Sunny's our Lady Grey tea. And so what if he is more trouble than he is help? So what if he cries when we say, will you fuck us? So what if he explodes when we say, tell me something about you? It's amazing what it promises. We're not bored in the slightest, ever, ever. We're blown away. The ones that don't work out for us for a number of reasons, we let go. Really, it's the best thing for them, Bunny says. The ones who bite, the ones who scream, usually get the axe, unless Bunny is too tired to put on her apron. Then they go in the basement for a while until Bunny feels like taking a long, long drive. That's when we lead them out the back door at a very dark hour. We drive them out to a field or a warehouse area on the west side and drop them off. Bunny says we're setting them free. Usually Bunny takes them because she has the SUV and the strongest emotional constitution. We went with her once. Keep me company, Bunny, Bunny said, and after this we can get drive-through fries. Okay, Bunny, we said. But it was a not nice drive. What with the whimpering boys, the whimpering hybrids, Bunny, in the trunk, whimpering their scrambled words. Hunt you I will, everything tell me. Virginia Woolf is not your daughter. I sentence you to a nuanced labyrinth. Bunny tried to drown them out by cranking her cherubic harp music, but we could still hear them. Why do we have to take them so far, we asked her. Bunny, we already told you. Otherwise they come back. Is that really ethical though, Bunny? To just take them out to the other side of town and leave them there? If they're dangerous? If they have nowhere to go? Ethical, Bunny repeated, like she'd never heard the word, even though obviously she had. She is so, so smart. She's been going to the best schools in the world since she was 5. She can play the oboe and she can fence and she speaks 3 dead languages. Ethical, Bunny said, like we'd made the word up, like it was just some silly monster we were trying to make out of our own hair, which she herself lovingly braided for us. She stared at the windshield. Uh-oh, we upset her. Don't be upset, Bunny. We think of it as art meets life, Bunny. We're putting art into the world. It's like a living, interactive installation, you know? But I mean, if you'd rather kill them, you go right ahead, Bunny. No, that's okay. We can't bring ourselves to brandish an axe just yet. Bunny knows that. We have nightmares every night as it is. Bunny knows that too. And who is there for us when we wake up? Bunny is. Shh, Bunny, Bunny will say, stroking our damp forehead, our sticky braids, putting her hand on our heart to stop it from beating. Take these, they'll help you sleep. She turned up the cherubic harp music. Each song is 20 minutes long and meanders like a bitchy cat. The woman's high, folksy voice hurts our teeth, but we would never tell Bunny this. We said we love this song so much. But Bunny wasn't listening. Bunny was singing along in her own high voice. Cherubic harp music is her very, very favorite. Okay, and I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, thank you, Mona. That was great. Thanks so much. I was trying to, you couldn't hear me laughing because I was on mute. But I think the whole room, that's one thing that's missing with the Zoom reading is you can't hear everyone's reactions, but I think you would have heard a lot of laughing. It's lovely. All right. So I think what we'll do is we'll do the 2 readings, and then if everyone's up for it, a Q&A afterwards, and we'll do chat Q&A or maybe unmute Q&A, but we'll figure that out after. So for now, I'd like to introduce Klon Berry. Klon Berry was born in Saigon and raised in Danvers, Massachusetts. Quan Berry is the author of 4 poetry collections: Asylum, Controvertibles, Water Puppets, and Loose Strife, as well as 2 novels. She Weeps Each Time You're Born and We Ride Upon Sticks, which was published by Random House this past March. A professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, she has received an Agnes Lynch Starrett Poetry Prize and fellowships from the Wallace Stegner Program, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing. She earned a BA from the University of Virginia and an MFA from the University of Michigan. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, the Missouri Review, Plowshares, the Kenyon Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review, and elsewhere. Upon publication this spring, We Ride Upon Sticks was named one of USA Today's 5 books not to miss and included in Time Magazine's list of 12 new books to read in March, Pop Sugar's 25 books to add to your March must-read list, LitHub's 10 books to read in March, and really too many other excellent lists to name. The Paris Review called We Ride Upon Sticks a feminist Bildungsroman, which I thought was a very interesting way of thinking of it. Oh, the Oprah magazine called it spellbinding, wickedly fun. Each sentence fizzes like a just opened bottle of new Coke. Kirkus Reviews calls Berry deeply witty and the book touching, hilarious, and deeply satisfying. And as Vulture puts it, this is a novel by a poet and it rules. The prose style is neon and the laughs do not stop. I feel like the author wrote the entire book with an evil grin on her face. I kind of feel like both of you wrote these books with an evil grin on your faces. So this book is really, it's sui generis. It is almost literally a genre unto itself. I can't think of another book that is quite like it. And I mean, I'll get into more when we do the Q&A. Just even the narration, the approach to the story is really just extremely unique. On its surface, it's a comic romp through the late 1980s in suburban Massachusetts, following a team of high school field hockey players as they break a losing streak with some supernatural help from a notebook with Emilio Estevez's face on the cover. The 80s references are so specific that they almost made me gasp when I would read them, like bringing out, it felt like my Proust's Madeleine in some way, like these long dormant sense memories. I like scratch and sniff stickers were being, but beneath the surface of the novel are deeper themes of identity, power, and complexity of character. Is the team's winning season really thanks to Emilio Estevez's dark powers of witchcraft, or are these as adolescents who are tapping into deeper, more complex powers within themselves and finding strength through communal spirit? As a quote from the book puts it, 11 sticks bundled together can withstand anything. 1 stick left out in the cold all on its own can't even withstand itself. So with that, I'd like to introduce Klon Berry. Hi. You need to unmute yourself, don't you? Okay.
Yay, I'm back.
There you go. Yeah.
So for I was like trying to like sneakily be like, I can't unmute myself. I was sending like frantic notes like, help me.
I know you're panicked. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's because like everybody else is on mute, but then so anyway.
So I'm glad we got to figure it out.
I'm glad it all worked out. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to the Hudson Valley Writer Center and to Jennifer for having this. Mona, it was great to hear your work. You had a reference to baboons, and I'm like, I also have a reference to baboons. I guess baboons just get a bad rap, and you know what I mean? Like they're just always seen as over-sexualized. So I'm like, baboons, baboons. So, so really great to be here. So thank you so much. I'm just going to start. So as was mentioned, my book's about field hockey, witches, teen girls, the 1980s. I'm going to start actually with a small section that introduces all of them. So for those of you who've never played field hockey, there are 11 players on a team. And the way the book is structured is that each chapter looks at a different character and a different member of the team. And so I'm sure many of you probably remember, either good or bad, back to your high school days when you would have fall pep rallies. And so the fall pep rally is when all the different sports teams come together and they're like, woo, woo, you know, class of 89, we're gonna rock it. And so the section that this small section I'm gonna read basically introduces you to the 11 characters at the fall pep rally. And the only thing you need to know is that it starts off with a principal, you know, who's up there in front of the school trying to get them to behave. And then for the younger members of the audience, you might not be familiar with the Budweiser theme song. I'm always surprised like how many people just don't remember that. But so again, the Budweiser theme song back in the day, it's just simply when you say Budweiser, you've said it all. So that's the only reference that you need to know for this particular section. So, and it's also true that I'm showing my age. So for those of you who don't know, they're like, what, Budweiser, what? So anyway, it's okay, thanks. Then Principal Yoff was standing at the microphone, trying to get the student body to shut up. When it quieted down, he said a bunch of stuff about Falcon's spirit, the trophy case outside the main office, the exceptionalism of Danvers High's young men and women, blah, blah, blah. We always wondered if Principal Yoff even liked pep rallies. The guy had a PhD in education from Wisconsin. Did he feel like a tool standing up there in front of the student body, yammering on about winning? We felt embarrassed for him when he concluded his speech with his fist in the air and a weak noise that we gathered from context was supposed to be some sort of rebel yell. We didn't even know why, okay, sorry. From there, the pep rally was pretty unremarkable until the hoop appeared. Karen Burrows and the cheerleaders had just gotten it positioned in place, a big blue falcon painted right in the middle of it, when Jen Fiorenza turned to us and screamed, "Field, field, field. Hockey, hockey, hockey," we yelled. And before any of us knew what was happening, we were charging the hoop, a herd of water buffalo stampeding on the African plain. Principal Yoff, a casualty of our herd mentality. The guy buffeted every which way as we roared past. Jen was the first through, her claw a rhino horn, the paper tearing, each of us as if we were being born again, only to reemerge in a whole new world, all 11 of us pouring through. Abby Putnam, a ray of light, Girl Corey, a woman scorned, Mel Boucher with the dark mark on her neck, Boy Corey hoping nobody was looking at him, Becca Bajelica wondering why she hadn't worn a third bra, Sue Yoon with her hair dyed Kool-Aid and Crediberry, AJ Johnson wondering who among us really had her back, Heather Houston following blindly without her glasses, Julie Kaling like a monarch butterfly on its way to Mexico, little Smitty gnashing madly at the paper with her teeth, be aggressive, be aggressive. The other fall sports falling in line behind us, the football team bringing up the rear, the marching band blowing their brains out, the cheerleaders screaming along to the Budweiser theme. When you say DHS, you've said it all. So again, very much when the season opens, it's very much of a rags to riches kind of thing. So the Danvers field hockey team, lo and behold, has been, you know, at the bottom of the rankings for the conference for the past who knows how long, since the dawn of time. And so that's where they start their season. But again, then they turn to the darker arts, hopefully in an attempt to try and make it to the state championship. And so they learn along the way, as they're dabbling in the dark arts, that they have to sort of fuel, again, this Emilio Estevez entity who is hopefully, you know, helping them turn their season around. And so they try different kinds of things. You know, when I was a kid, I don't think I'm the only one, you know, you would try with your friends to do various things. Like, I think many of us are familiar, you know, if you stand in a mirror and you say Bloody Mary a certain number of times, maybe, you know, she'll appear, that kind of thing. So in this particular section I'm about to read, which is, again, is a short section, basically the field hockey team has just had an outing that did not go well for them. And so they're trying to figure out, what can we do to sort of pump up the dark energy that our team can access? And so this is what they decide to do to try and pump up the dark energy. And again, they just had a terrible outing as a team. They just kind of, yeah, they had a game that just didn't go their way. Suddenly, Julie Kaling stood up on the locker room's only bench. She didn't say a word, just held something up high in the air for one and all to see, waving the object around as if the thing was the answer to all our problems. Eventually, we quieted down and looked. It was an egg. We looked closer. It had a small face drawn on it in magic marker, 2 blue eyes with long lashes, a pert little pink mouth, some yellow curlicues for hair. "What is that?" said Jen Fiorenza. "Priscilla," said Julie. "It's her baby," Heather explained. "What?" "Health class," Heather said. "We each got an egg we're supposed to take care of for a week. It's supposed to show us how hard it is to be a parent." "It just makes me hungry," said little Smitty. How is Priscilla supposed to help us get to state?" said Abby Putnam. Julie was now cradling the egg in her palm, patting it soothingly on the head. "I'm willing to sacrifice her," she said in a small voice. We all stood there dumbfounded. Finally, a spark caught. "Ah, you're saying we should egg someone," said Mel Boucher. "Not a bad idea." Julie made a face. "No. 300 years ago, the Salem witch trial started when a bunch of girls cracked an egg in a bowl of water, trying to see the future. They wanted to find out who their husbands would be. Gently, she kissed Priscilla on the top of her eggy head. "I'm saying we should crack Priscilla open and have her tell us what to do." We all stood around internally debating it. To prognosticate by egg or not to prognosticate by egg, that was the question. "Anyone got a better idea?" Heather said. "Yeah, we throw Priscilla at the door of the teacher's lounge," said boy Corey. "So what?" said girl Corey. "They wash it off. Big whoop." "What's an egg and water gonna tell us?" said Jen Fiorenza. "Who knows?" said Sue Yoon. "If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul." "No, really, Julie gets a 0 on the assignment," said Heather. "I'll bring her a new egg," said little Smitty. "Mrs. Tilson signed the bottom of each one," said Heather. Julie tipped Priscilla over. There it was, Mrs. Tilson's handwriting scrawled on the shell like a barcode. "Julie, you up for this?" said Abby Putnam. Julie nodded. With her free hand, she undid her braid, letting her long black hair fall down her back like a superhero's cape, or maybe like a villain's. The best we could do was a clear plastic sandwich bag filled with carrot sticks. Heather Houston never ate the healthy lunch her mom always packed for her, instead each day buying 2 bags of sour cream and onion chips and a Suzy Q from the school store and tossing the healthy lunch on her way home. We threw the carrots in the trash and filled the bag with water. Julie Kaling did the honors. It was hard without a bowl. She cracked Priscilla on the edge of the bench and did her best to hold back the yolk. We watched as the white slid down into the bag, the thing like a big slimy booger. "It's kind of like a human sacrifice," whispered Sue Yoon. "Cool," said little Smitty. We watched as the egg white took on new form in the water. "We're supposed to look at it by candlelight," said Heather. Julie Kaling had been lighting votives at the beginning of each day in her locker. She pulled one out of her bag. We turned off the lights and lit it. Then we looked long and hard. We looked harder than we've ever looked at anything. Maybe it was all in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, it probably was. We all saw the gist of the same shape, but that's where the similarities ended. This is what we saw. Jen Fiorenza, a tail. Girl Corey, a car key. Boy Corey, a stamen and pistol. Sue Yoon, a TV antenna. Becca Bajelica, an erect penis. Mel Boucher, a fan. Little Smitty, a rabbit's foot. Heather Houston, a candy bar. Julie Kaling, a thumb. A.J. Johnson, a pen. Poor Abby Putnam didn't see anything at all. In the darkness, she couldn't tell the difference between the egg white and the water. She worried that maybe now she wasn't getting enough beta-carotene in her diet. "Well, that was a whole lot of nothing," said Jen Fiorenza. She poured the bag with the dregs of Priscilla down a drain in the middle of the floor. Womp womp. I have to say that's completely true, that my mom would pack me, I hope my mom's not here, but my mom would pack me a very healthy lunch every day, and every day. My friends at high school still tease me about it. I would seriously buy 2 bags of sour cream and onion chips and a Suzy Q, and that was my lunch. It's because I came from a family that we never were allowed like junk food, and so like the second I would step up, I would be at school and be like, so that part of the story is completely true. I just thought really briefly that I would actually read, because I'm also a poet, that I would actually read a poem about Salem and about Salem Village Parsonage and all that kind of fun stuff. And this poem, I've been thinking about field hockey and women and witches for a very long time, because I think there's a lot of synergy between those things. As was mentioned, so the town of Danvers historically used to be part of Salem. Back in 1692, Salem was actually much bigger, and part of it was called Salem Village. Salem Village eventually became the town of Danvers, and that's where I'm from. But a lot of the things that happened during the course of the Salem witch trials actually started in Salem Village, which again is Danvers. And so this poem is called The Excavated Foundations of the Salem Village Parsonage as Recipients. It's a really long title. But basically, if you're in the town of Danvers, you can actually go to an excavated site. And the original meeting house where the first accusations and things were made, the meeting house doesn't exist anymore, but you can see the excavated foundations for where it used to be. And basically, so the excavated foundations of the Salem Village Parsonage as recipients. I stumbled upon the word recipients in a dictionary, and I just felt it was really super beautiful. Basically, recipients just means wisdom after the fact. Basically, it's hindsight, but I just thought it was a really super beautiful word. And so I've always been thinking about the Salem witch trials, you know, in terms of hindsight, in terms of the idea of like, if you could know what your future held, if you could, you know, crack open an egg and know what was going to happen, would you do it? And so this poem just sort of deals a little bit with that. As you'll hear when I read it though, like my poetry is very different from my fiction in the sense that my poetry is very lyrical. It's not necessarily linearly narrative based. So there's that. The excavated foundations of the Salem Village Parsonage as recipients. Like a mouth set in the frozen ground, and how our childhoods were informed by it, this innate sense of something missing. Even now, I imagine the girls were both pale and dark, like a flock of moons reflected in water, something seismic, languishing. What I would have done, they did. The night clear as broth, the fire pure volition. Who isn't desperate to see into the mechanism any way they can? I would have seen a house burning. I would have seen a man coming to me over water. I would have seen this place, its hold on me, the primacy of the deep image and the supplanting of narration. Where do we learn the art of explication? What can our origins teach us about who we should be? Then was the winter of small yellow birds, of visions. What this place suspended in the world beneath the world denotes, truth and its transmitting. And then I think I'll just finish with, again, another just little blurby section. So I have to admit, you know, sometimes I'm sure, Mona, you get the same thing. People ask you like, who are your favorite characters? Or do you have a favorite chapter or what have you? It is true that so the way that my book is structured, as I mentioned, each chapter is a different character, and each chapter also a little bit follows a different field hockey game that they're playing against a different team. And this particular chapter, it's so all the chapters have Danvers, the name of the team, versus whoever else they're playing. This chapter is Danvers versus Salem. So it's set on Halloween. And basically what it is they're actually in Salem on Halloween. They have a game, and then after the game is over, they spend Halloween night in Salem. And I have to admit, it's kind of my favorite chapter. And so basically, they're in Salem. They've just gone to this pizza joint where they met these college boys, who they then kind of gave the slip to. And so they've been waiting for this parade to start. So there's a parade in Salem every year, and they're waiting for the parade to start. And in the meantime, they've gone into like a witch shop, a Wiccan shop, where you can buy various things. And so now, again, they're waiting for the parade to start. I will just say really quickly, the parade now in Salem is very different from what it was in the 80s. In the 80s, it was a little bit seedy. And it's true that what's described here is kind of the things that I would see in the 1980s at the Salem witch parade. So again, they're waiting for the parade. We found a spot on a corner by Derby Street. The crowd was thin, the night cold. In a few hours, it would be November. There was nothing to do but wait. Becca Bajelica began twirling her stick like a majorette in order to keep moving and stay warm. Finally, we saw a cop car inching up the street, its lights washing the darkness with much needed color. This was it. Halloween was finally here. A few hundred people trailed silently in the cop car's wake. As they passed by, we realized it wasn't a parade. It was a memorial. Most of the people had on long black robes. Some wore witches' hats, others flower garlands wreathing their heads. One man had an intricate set of horns sprouting from his brow, the things long and twisted like an antelope's. He was marching behind a banner that said, "I walk the path of the ancient ones. Nature is my church." Other people were carrying signs that said, "Never again," under a drawing of a pentacle. I don't get it, said Abby Putnam. What am I missing? It's the Wiccans, said Heather Houston. Who? Said Gur Corey. Wiccans, pagans, witches, said Heather. I don't actually know if it's all interchangeable. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. She started flipping through the book she'd just bought. Actually, it says right here, all Wiccans are pagans, but not all pagans are Wiccans. Speak English, Poindexter, said A.J. Johnson, her long black braids rustling behind her like fringe. Heather gave it some more thought. I guess it's the way all Catholics are Christians, but not all Christians are Catholics, she said. Even though this made sense, without uttering a word, little Smitty reached over with her stick and closed the book. Then a group of people across the street from where we were standing began to yell. One of them had a big sloppy sign that read, John 3:16, and looked as if he'd scribbled it with his less dominant hand. Two others unfurled a banner that said, Suffer not a witch to live. To our eyes, the people yelling weren't any spring chickens. It was kind of surprising to see a group of middle-aged folks who looked like they should have known better, screaming themselves hoarse. I know one of those ladies, said Julie Min, pointing at a woman in a gray peacoat. She's from my church. That is definitely uncool, said Boy Corey. What, being a witch or being anti-witch, said Julie Kaling. Modern-day witches don't believe in the devil, said Heather. Pagans mostly worship Mother Nature. Christmas trees are a pagan ritual the Catholic Church co-opted. Much of the ceremonies in the Catholic Mass comes from pagan times. Whatever, said newly adult Julie Kaling. We watched as the parade slogged by. It was pretty anemic. It only took about 10 minutes to pass us. For a moment, it made you feel like the witch trials maybe weren't all that long ago. Somebody was throwing eggs. One hit a woman in the shoulder. She looked down at her soiled robe and sort of smile grimaced. The least you can do is throw some bacon too, you coward, her friend yelled at the faceless knight. We deserve a good breakfast. A.J. Johnson made a mental note to herself. Always be laughing. Then we saw someone waving at us. He was wearing a Red Sox cap. It took a moment to realize it was Mark from Papagino's, he of the anchovy pizza fame. By the time we realized it was him, he had already crossed the street, so escaping out a side exit was out of the question. Well, that was weird, he said. We couldn't disagree. Glad you came, asked Julie Kaling. He said. It seemed like about the right answer. We heard there's a party going down over on Gallows Hill, he said. You guys want to come? Abby Putnam blamed the lameness of the Halloween parade on what happened next. If the parade had been cool and fun and uplifting, if we'd had a chance to see some amazing costumes, maybe someone walking around in an actual frame and dressed up as the Mona Lisa, then maybe we would have had enough and called it a day and headed to our cars and gone back home. But watching people get screamed at by their fellow man left a bad taste in your mouth. Who wants to end what's supposed to be one of the best nights of the year on a note of baconless eggs? Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to unmute everyone now so we can have our Q&A. Okay. You can all unmute yourselves.
Yay!
Yep, you're free.
Watch out. Here come the herds.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful reading.
That was lovely. Yeah, it was great.
And Lauren, your introductions were great too.
Aw, thank you. Quan, thank you for reading that poem. That was beautiful, and really that gave such a nice contrast to sort of to, as you say, it's very different from your fiction, but I think I might be going into a question. I think I'm really curious to know. I started out writing poetry myself in college, and then very, very, very slowly over the course of many, many years moved into fiction. But starting with prose poems and moving into little short stories, etc. It seems almost as if, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you emerged as a fully formed fiction writer out of a poet. And what was that transition like for you? And how do you go back and forth? How does that work?
I always say, when I was a kid, I blame a lot of like genre distinctions on the academy, right? Uh-huh. The academy, it's like everybody's a,
I want to pin her. I want to see her. Okay then. So why is this the unpinned video? Speak for you.
Like,
You already pinned her.
Not what we're, you know what I mean? And so I was always just interested in just writing whatever interested me. And it's true that I do consider one of the worst pieces of advice I ever got from a professor. A writing professor told me that I had to choose. She's like, you have to be a poet, or you have to be a fiction writer, or you have to be a playwright. And so I'm actually starting to write plays. My first production is going to happen, if the world goes back to normal, in 2022.
Wow.
So it just all interests me. So I've never really thought that there's that. I think it's kind of a mental thing. I've just never thought that there's that really big a difference. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, like the poetry is more lyrical, but at the end of the day, it's still storytelling. It's just more abstracted storytelling. And so what I'm interested in is just storytelling. And so sometimes I want to tell a story in a way in which the reader has to do a lot of work, and that happens in poetry. Sometimes I want to tell a story in a way in which I give reader more. And so this book gives a lot more. You know, my first novel, I gave a lot less. It was much more poetic in certain ways. You know, in my play, in the plays I'm writing, it's very similar. You know, how much do I want to do, or how much do I not want to do? So like I said, so at the end of the day, for me, it's just storytelling. And that's what I'm interested in.
You're almost ambidextrous in this way. It seems like, you know, often when you read,
most people are, they just don't give themselves enough credit, because it's true. Like, for example, now that I'm writing plays, like I just had my first thing done with actors and directors, and unfortunately, because of the world we're living in, it was all done on Zoom, right? But it's true that I know nothing about that world. So for example, these are all like union actors. I've never been like even in a Zoom room with like, I was shocked to learn how the union works and how union rules. But it's just, so it's true. At first it's a little intimidating, because like I didn't know any of that stuff. Like I didn't know there's a stage manager who's keeping notes. I didn't know everything is timed because of the union. Like, but you learn it pretty quickly. So it's just a matter of admitting, I don't know what's going on here, but then being open to learning it. And I do think though that we live in a world in which risk taking has, you know, people are afraid to take risks. And so I'm not saying it's super risky, like I'm risking anything, but you know what I mean? Like, so anyway. Yeah,
we are a very super specialized world too. Now people just keep in their niche and they don't want to break out of it. It seems like they don't even give themselves permission to try often. But I will say, just as a compliment I can't let go past, is that often when I read fiction written by poets, it feels very bogged down to me by the lyricism. The poetry sort of seeps in a way that almost becomes distracting, and that is not a problem for you, at least in my experience. So anyway, I just have to say that. So yeah, anyway, I don't want to dominate. Please, people with questions, come chat, put it in the chat, or just talk. Anybody? One?
Mona, do you have a background in poetry as well? Or how did you?
Yeah, I started as a poet too. Yeah, that was my first, big, like important piece of writing that I did, was this poem. And I read it to a professor of mine who was just teaching poetry, was not teaching writing. And I was so embarrassed that I asked if he would turn his chair away from me while I read it, because I was so embarrassed to be reading it, but I still wanted him to hear it clearly. So anyway, he told me that I should keep writing. And so I kept writing poems, but then it's kind of like what you were describing, Lauren, where I just started feeling like the form, I love the compression of poetry and how it can kind of create this incredible experience, right? Of a moment or of an emotion or just of an experience, right? It creates that. But I started wanting to tell, like, I kept thinking, like, in terms of narratives, my narratives kept getting bigger, and I wanted to kind of sink into them like a whole world and expand them. So I started going into short stories, and then eventually got into novels, and now I'm just totally in love with novels.
Right.
Yeah. But I still love poetry. As much as I rag on poetry in Bunny, I love poetry. I started off as a poet, and yeah.
Well, that's why you're allowed to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you call them? The reptiles?
The reptile people.
The reptile people.
Although that's more of a comment on the weirdness of cohorts in MFAs, and how, you know, there's just like they kind of form little tribes, and actually, you know, it's so strange because they do kind of silo us off. And it's actually hard to kind of jump over. It depends on the program, of course. So programs are different, but the program I went to, they were pretty separated. And then sometimes a poet would kind of be in fiction, and sometimes a fiction person would be in poetry, but it wasn't as common as it is in others. The school that I just taught at, I see one of my students is here, which is kind of awesome, Juliana. Hi, Juliana. She's not really visible, but hi. Hi. They actually do take their, like, part of their program is to take classes outside of your genre, which I think is so cool. Like, we should all do that for sure.
Oh, there's a question. Look at that. It says, for both authors, how did you deal with the texture and syntax of fairy tales? Did you have to resist it or embrace it? And that came from Megan Don.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Do you see it there in the chat?
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to go for it, Quan, or?
I think you have a little bit more fairy tales. Maybe, why don't you go first, if you don't mind?
Sure. So what I loved about bringing fairy tale into Bunny was it kind of gave me what I love about fairy tales is just that you don't, like, things happen and they don't really require explanation. The magic, I think, is magical because it's not grounded in all of this exposition and explanation. It follows a kind of intuitive logic. And that's, since the book is about the imagination and about the fruits of the imagination, I really wanted that logic in Bunny. That's the kind of structure that I wanted to follow. So I really embraced that about fairy tales. And so when it came to the transformations and why the girls are conjuring men out of bunnies, I never go into like the nuts and bolts of that. I mean, then it's like over. I mean, it would be like a magician kind of showing you how he's pulling a rabbit out of a hat. You know, it just doesn't work. So fairy, and the other thing that I love about fairy tales too is just that animal bridegroom story, which is the most common story actually in fairy tale. And there is one that I really love, one variant called The Hare's Bride, that was written by the Brothers Grimm. And it actually has a rabbit bridegroom, and he's a really creepy bridegroom. He's like, it's a sinister, kind of dark, lonely, sad fairy tale. And there aren't many that we still read. And I don't know, that one really stuck with me. So Bunny is a little bit of a tribute to that fairy tale. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, as for me, you know, it's interesting to think about in hindsight. I really wasn't thinking too much in terms of fairy tales. I was thinking more just in terms of like archetypes. You know, I'm thinking about witches, women coming into power, coming into one's voice, which fairy tales obviously very much deal with. I just wasn't thinking through that particular lens. You know, I was really thinking about, so as the book touches on a little bit, 300 years ago, the most powerful people for about 6 months in Salem were these teen girls who, you know, with a word from them, you would be imprisoned and potentially killed, you know? And so I was just really thinking about how do we come into power, you know, 300 years later, have a lot of things changed? Do these women have more options now, you know, what have you? I also was really interested in thinking about just collectives and how, you know, we're one person individually, but we act differently. Obviously think about the bunnies recently, we act differently in collectives. Yeah. So I could see in hindsight that there's definitely probably elements of fairy tale stuff in there, but I was thinking, like I said, through more of that lens of just archetype women's stories, I think.
Thank you. I have a question, if I can jump in. Can I go for it? My question was started with Quan explaining the structure of the book, sort of the 12 chapters, which sounds amazing, and I was wondering how you landed on that. And then I know Mona has written a novel and stories. I don't know, Quan, if you refer to your book in that way, but I was curious about the structure, if you could speak to that, how you came there.
Sure. So I'll just say, so each chapter is a different character. And again, so it's very much, it is a novel in the sense, like, it's not individual stories, for example, because if you just read one chapter, you wouldn't know a bunch of other things. And so it follows them over the course of the season. When it comes to novel stuff, for me, that's the hardest part. But once I have that locked in, and that is just structure, just figuring out what is my structure. You know, thinking about my very first novel, I probably wrote 400 pages and chuck stuff until I realized various things about, This book, though, I knew very quickly a lot about the structure. I just knew it's like, okay, this is the team, chapters, game, season, bam. And so I had that in place very, very quickly. I'm somebody, I personally do very little, I probably shouldn't brag about this, so it probably sounds like I'm bragging. I do very little research. I find that research weighs me down because then I feel responsibility, you know, and sort of kind of like I'm responsible to it. It doesn't allow me then to make things up as easily. So I only try and do as much research as I really need. Fortunately, because I grew up in this town in the 80s and I played field hockey and we went to the state championship, although we didn't use craft to get there. But so in many ways, I didn't have to do a lot of research at all. But once I had that structure, like I said, this is probably the fastest I wrote this, like a draft of this book basically in a year, which for me compared to my first book, was not the case. So.
When you were in high school in Danvers, did you ever think that someday you'd write about this?
I don't know.
Is there ever a little inkling someday?
Yeah.
This could be good.
I'm really fortunate in the sense that I've, because I'm a professor and I'm crazily spoiled. I've actually traveled a lot. Like I've traveled a ton. Like again, it's one of those humble brags, but like it's mind-boggling to me. Like somehow I've been to all 7 continents. Like I don't even understand that. And the thing is that usually when I go someplace, I do not know what I'm going to do with it. I'm just going just to see it. And then years later, I figure out. So for example, now I was in Mongolia in 2006 or something. And only now did I realize what I'm going to do with that, with Mongolia as a setting. You know, I was in Antarctica in 2004. And it's only now that I'm like, oh, I know what I'm doing with that. You know what I mean? So I feel like high school, the whole thing about high school, like I didn't know what I was going to do with it back then. But now I'm like, oh, now I know what I'm going to do with it. But Mona, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts again about the idea of you have a collection story, like late stories.
Oh yeah. That kind of came out of 2 poems actually. So my first book was called 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, and it's obviously a play on the Wallace Stevens poem 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And what I wanted was kind of to just look at these different ways that body image informs different kinds of relationships, you know, the ways that it informs very particular dynamics, like within certain relationships. So like your relationship with your lover, your relationship with your mother, your relationship with your friends, your relationship with clothing, all of those things. I wanted to really zero in, and a short story allows you to do that in a way that a novel just doesn't. So it was really important to me that I do these episodic chapters, so they kind of functioned as short stories, but then still be telling the story of one woman's life. So there's the novel. So I needed both structures to really tell the story the way that I wanted to tell it. And I just love there's nothing like the tension in the short story. And I wanted that tension in every episode. So, yeah. I still love short stories, even though I'm always writing novels now. I can't help it. They're so seductive.
Yeah. I feel like I have to give a plug for plays, because the thing about playwriting, which I'm really super into right now, the weird thing about it is that it's collaborative. Like you're only as good as who's ever doing whatever, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's just not good, right? But the thing about it is that maybe people who are playwrights would totally disagree with me about, like, real playwrights. I'm sort of still dabbling in it, but it's the idea that you can write a pretty decent play in like 6 weeks. You know what I mean? In the sense that, I mean, obviously it still needs help and work, but whereas a novel will take at least, years. And so I feel like you can accomplish a lot pretty quickly. And that's just something so tension and just time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, I mean, I've just finished a novel that I just turned into my editor that is about a theater director. And she's directing this production of All's Well That Ends Well. And it goes all wrong. And then she ends up living Macbeth off stage. So I had to think about plays quite a lot. And it's a medium that's always excited me. But I've never actually, because I love dialogue so much, and I just love like seeing people perform is so exciting. So how are you finding the transition? How are you finding the move to that medium?
Yeah, the thing so a couple of things, again, in my very limited experience, is that one is that an actor can really fake you out from making you think that your writing is so much better than it is. Like there's this one amazing actor, and I was like, oh my God, that play that's dumb. You know what I mean? But it's like, no, it's because he's just that good. You know what I mean? And you still need to work on it. So there's that part of it and then the whole thing is just like the business aspect, which I didn't even realize. Like when you have a play that's actually produced, you have to get it licensed, and it's this weird thing. But the thing that makes it weird to me is that I'm realizing that in playwriting, everybody has an opinion. And I know for a lot of us here in the audience, we're writers and we're used to being in spaces where you're getting criticism. But somehow, like in that world, I'm used to getting criticism, and I know how to filter it. Like I know what to trust and I know what not to trust when I hear different things. But in the playwriting world, I find that I get vastly different feedback. And because I'm still not quite sure, I'm like, one person said this and that said the exact opposite. And in this world, I'm not quite sure how to figure that out yet. It's definitely, but the collaborative aspect of it, it's also good for me because I don't really think I'm a control freak, but you really do have to learn to just step back and what's going to be,
Right. So. In some ways, that seems like it would be really freeing, just because in writing, you're just this lone, captain of this ship that's like your work, and it's kind of daunting and terrible.
It seems like it, but I could imagine, because I can hear, like, when you, like, in the sections that you read, because you also have a certain stylist ear. It's true that it's like you hear it, and then when you hear somebody do something different, you're like, you know, like, I didn't hear it like that. I heard it like that, you know.
Yeah.
So you have to,
You let it go. It would be exciting. Yeah.
No, it's so interesting to hear you two talking about this, because I was really thinking about both of your books, and something about what we were all just talking about, the root of power in these books, of the women in your books. And it seems like there's a real push and pull between the power of individualism and creativity, like the individual imagination, versus the sort of group collective power of the coven, like coming together and becoming more powerful as a group. And I feel as if Bunny seems to lean more toward the individual world and the individual world of the imagination, and We Ride with Sticks a little bit seems to lean the other way, where the individuation of each girl seems to derive almost from their group membership, and they're much more voluntary members of that team. They're voluntary team players, versus in Bunny, Samantha is such an outsider and really conflicted about her membership in this group. And even the narration of the two books, it really says this. The first person singular of Samantha, which is very internal, and then the sort of the we voice, almost like the hive mind groupthink of the this omniscient we. That, you know, it's funny, I looked at that diagram at the beginning of We Ride with Sticks, and it has each of the characters diagrammed, and I'm like, well, who's we? Who's the we? You know, there is none. So it's this sort of strange disembodied we that's the group. And I don't know if this is a question so much, but hearing, I guess, if you have anything just to add to that, or how do you feel yourselves as authors? What is your relationship yourselves to individual creation versus being in the world and part of a group? I mean, I could go on, and you know, how have you been during the pandemic? Have you been in lockdown? You know, are you thriving? Are you introverts? Are we extroverts, introverts? What are we as authors? I mean, we're complex people, but
Yeah.
What's it like to be on a book tour? I mean, I can go on, but this is a whole big topic that your books made me think of.
Yeah.
And to think about the idea of like individual versus, you know, Mona, I'd be interested to know your experiences too, like as a woman of color, right? As an author of color, and then thinking about people's expectations about that. You know, it's true that on most of my books, I've never used an author photo. You know, I've done various things. I've made certain decisions that I've made, and that's what I've done, and I can't change that now. And so, you know, the idea of the individual, because it's that weird thing where, you know, especially for writers of color, you know, the two of us, it's like that idea of how do you represent what you want to represent as an individual in your work, and yet how recognizing too that your work also, people will look at it as being representative of something larger, you know what I mean? And that's always a tension there. You know, there's a way in which you could let that hold you back, but I've actually thought of it more in terms of letting it work for you, is like that I feel like held in a way, right? As opposed to held back, like I feel held. Isn't there like a Lizzo, in one of Lizzo's songs, she talks about that, you're supposed to hold me down instead of holding me back, right? Or something like that. And so it's more like that. I try and come at it from that space, as opposed to the space of letting it get in your head again, where you're feeling held back, if that makes sense. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think about that a lot. And I think, I mean, the kind of positioning of the outsiderness in Bunny comes from two different places, really. First, I've never felt comfortable in groups. I just don't, you know, like fundamentally, I have like this anxiety about them. Like I just feel I could connect more with people one-on-one. And so Bunny really plays with that. And so the group is kind of horrific for this character. And it plays too, I think, with the idea that maybe is around going to school for art, which is that if you join a collective, you might lose your own voice somehow. That there might be things that just get absorbed or lost or taken away or compromised. And so Bunny really plays with that, you know, with the horror elements. Yeah.
Along those lines, what advice would you two give to students? We have probably a lot of fiction students in the audience tonight, people who are writing a novel or short stories. what advice would each of you give to students who are trying to get published, emerging writers?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just finish up by saying one thing about being a woman of color. It's an interesting thing because Samantha places a lot of emphasis on the bunny's whiteness, so much so that so many people have commented about this to me. And I think, you know, her own ethnicity is kind of ambiguous. There's a couple of references that make you kind of question it, especially with something that the bunnies say towards the end of the book. And I think it was ambiguous for me because, you know, I'm mixed, obviously. Like I'm half North African, half white, and people identify me differently, you know, and so they're both kind of identities that I've never felt fully entitled to claim, and so it ends up becoming this weird kind of like ambiguous space in my work, but. Samantha's perspective is kind of my default perspective, and that perspective always places whiteness outside, and that's why she fixates on it. So I just think it's kind of, now that I'm becoming more kind of aware of that, how that's working its way into my work, I want to kind of work with it and lean into it as you were kind of describing, and make it more of a place of like agency and power, you know? So yeah.
As far as Jennifer's question about the idea of like advice that I have for students, it's such a tough one, right? And it really, it's not, because you just so easily you sound cliche, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it hurts to write what you know, but that's not I think really the big thing for me is like, write about what makes you, like what you love, you know, one way, shape, or form. I had a student last semester who was writing these poems. I teach a forms class on poetic traditional forms. And so it's a lot of sonnets and stuff. And so when kids are writing sonnets, they always like write about nature. You know, it's like, do you really care that much about nature? You know what I mean? It's like that. And then I found out this kid had a real interest in WWE, like wrestling, professional wrestling. And I was like, write some sonnets about wrestling. And he did, and it came alive. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, so to me, like the most cliche thing though, really is just like, write the thing that excites you. Like, you know, Lauren had mentioned that she thinks that both of our books, and if they were written with like evil smiles on our faces. I mean, it's true. You know what I mean? I was just like, what are these kids up to? You know what I mean? It was fun, you know? It's not necessarily every project's going to be like that, but that would be my first thing. And then my second thing too, something Jennifer that you said is like, I wouldn't worry. I think that sometimes young writers can sometimes be influenced by like, well, what's hot right now? So it's true, like the 80s and like witches, I did not know that when I started this book. Like, you know, I mean, obviously Stranger Things and then just witches in general, but like, it wasn't like I was trying to tap into that. I was just doing what I was going to do. And so I think you have to do what you're going to do and not worry about, because it takes so long to do anything anyway that trends change and what have you. So.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that. I mean, it really is, I think, about leaning into what you love, leaning into what excites you, and not trying to be, you know, and then also just being open to discovery, because I was so, I don't know about you, Quan, but like I had my writers like in college that I was like really attached to, and I was really writing off of them for a while. And then I heard this Ginsberg poem, Howl, and it totally lit me up inside and opened me up in a way that I would have never expected to be opened up. And that's where that first generative poem came from, that changed my life and made me decide that I really wanted to write, you know. It was Howl that gave that to me. Just there was something about that confessional voice. I just didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could do that in writing. And that was something I wouldn't have come across on my own. I was just open, you know. So I think that's another thing, is just to be curious, and to be open, and to read outside of your comfort zone, and at the same time lean into what fascinates you, to try to kind of be open to both. Yeah.
Yeah, if I were going to add, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question about appearance, because that's super important in Quan's novel and in both of Mona's novels. So in Quan's novel, there's a lot of talk about the claw, right? Which is a big deal. And if you grew up in that time, you understand that. And like, how did you decide to put the power into that like particular aspect of hairstyle as opposed to like AJ's hairstyle? And The same with Mona. Like, how do you decide what part of the feminine appearance was most important and what would hold power?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two things in that. A, because I had 11 characters, I knew that I had to do work to distinguish them, you know, and that meant physical work too, right? It wasn't just characteristics like, oh, this one's a brainiac and this one's like the Catholic Virgin, but I also just physically had to differentiate them, right? And so again, one has the claw, one has a thing on the neck, you know, somebody else, you know, gets the contusion, you know, so I just physically was just trying to make them different, right? And then if you think about the idea of appearance and hair, which I don't think I'm not really thinking about this until you just asked that question, particularly with respect to AJ Johnson, so the only Black character who has braids. But in thinking about how hair, for some communities, really it's a political statement, you know. Again, this idea of coming into one's own. So I think when I was trying to make decisions about who would have what physical characteristics, it wasn't just the idea that I would give somebody something just to differentiate them, but it had to do character work at the same time. And so, for example, I'm thinking about the claw. To me, the claw is Jen Fiorenza's id, right? It's a character in the sense that it's like the subtitles underneath. Like she thinks she says one thing, but the claw's like the real story. It was like actually, you know, like we all have that, you know what I mean? So again, it was a distinguishing feature, but it also did character work, right? And then in thinking about AJ Johnson and her braids, you know, it's the idea that she recognizes that it's what makes her different from everybody else, you know what I mean? But at the same time, the people are like, hey, you look like Darcel from Solid Gold, you know what I mean? So that it's, you know what I mean? But again, like it was doing character work. So hopefully that's what I was trying to think about when I was creating like these different sort of physical characters for different people.
Right. I think for me the appearance, the feminine, like I made the bunnies really monstrous, and I think that's because I'm fascinated by the hyper feminine and I find it monstrous. I find cute things really monstrous, like the cutesy hyper feminine kind of kawaii type stuff. I find really scary and horrific, or there's just elements of like there's just elements of the sinister in that. There's real elements of darkness to that, but I'm seduced by it too, and I can't deny that it has a power, and that it has a power over me, and so I leaned into that to create the bunnies. The bunnies are basically my nightmare. They're just basically my feminine nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah, and you definitely embraced the dresses.
Oh God, yeah. And I mean, I love dresses.
Yeah.
You know, I love them too. I love them. But
When I read about the different prints on their dresses, I'm like, I bet Mona has that dress because you have this collection of printed dresses, the bees, etc.
Yeah.
I'm dying to know. I mean, I know, and I would love for you to talk more about the book you just turned in, All's Well, Mona, and also Quan, I'm dying to know what you're doing with Mongolia and Antarctica, if that's going to be part of a new project that you're working on now, or what's next. Let's talk about exciting future plans.
Simona, do you want to?
Okay.
Sure. So this next book is coming out next year, and it's a novel, and it's about a theater professor who has chronic pain, and so like every day is like a struggle, and she's directing this undergraduate production of All's Well That Ends Well, and it's a mutinous production. The students hate her, they hate the play, they don't want to put it on, they want to put on Macbeth. She barely like has a grasp on this, and then through making a dark bargain, she gets to put on her play and becomes pain-free. But like she lives Macbeth off stage. So she does have to end up performing Macbeth. Her life becomes Macbeth. So it was really fun because I just, you know, chronic pain is something that I've kind of been struggling with for a number of years. So it was really good to be able to write into that experience. But I also, you know, I kind of fell in love with Shakespeare a few years ago, actually when I was struggling. And that play, All's Well That Ends Well, really spoke to me. And so did Macbeth. And I started seeing parallels between them because they're both about people who circumvent the natural order of things in order to get what they want. But one in the comedy doesn't have to pay a price for that. She gets what she wants and it's lovely and we all are happy for her in the end. But in Macbeth, there's like, you know, madness, you know, head on a stake at the end of it, right? So, so I thought it would be fun to put the two plays together. Yeah.
It's so fascinating because there must be something in the water, because I'm thinking about Macbeth for a play, but it would be years from now.
Oh, yeah. It's a great play.
Yeah, like my favorite play. But in my play, what it is it's basically the character of Macduff. And then there's also Lady Macbeth has a maidservant, a gentlewoman. And so my idea for this play that I haven't written yet is the idea that both those actors are people of color who are cast in a production of Macbeth. And yet they both believe that they should have been cast as Macbeth or as Lady Macbeth. And so it's like, what are they going to do to try and, I'm just thinking about that. But yeah, as far as the other two novel projects, so one is finished. I don't know, I don't have a publication date yet, but basically some years ago, the Dalai Lama had talked about how maybe he would reincarnate while he was still alive. He's not going to do that now. But anyway, so my novel though follows, so Mongolia and Tibet have a real tradition of what's called the religion of the yellow. So it's the yellow hat to Tibetan Buddhism. And so it follows a young monk in Mongolia who goes looking for a reincarnation in the Mongolian country. Mongolia is a vast country that really doesn't have highways and things like that. So they go looking for a reincarnation. So that's what that book is about. And then a book I haven't started yet. I'm on sabbatical next year. So my plan next year is to write this play about Macbeth and then to work on. So the way that I pitch it to people is the novel takes place in Antarctica. And basically, you know, think about the protests and all these things that have been happening and thinking about like, how does one address, like, how do you know, like, I mean, I could write something that totally doesn't touch on that kind of stuff at all, but I want to be writing about society and things that are happening and that kind of stuff. And so I thought about it for a long time, and it's the idea, I basically call it Lord of the Flies, but in Antarctica. So I have been a tourist in Antarctica. And so it's the idea that these tourists in Antarctica get stuck on an island. And so it gives you a chance to have different kinds of people, you know, different cultural backgrounds, what have you, who are stuck on an island in Antarctica. I actually kind of, because I'm interested in genre, I actually kind of want it to be a horror book. And yet I actually can't read horror because I get too scared. Like I can't read Stephen King, although I mean, I have, but it's like, he really scares me. And so I'm just kind of curious, like if I wrote a horror book, like what would that look like? I think you can write horror without having like blood and all that kind of stuff. But
oh yeah. I mean, Mona, your book was sort of thought of as a horror book, even though it doesn't give you nightmares. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'd always just thought of horror as always being like really stabby or, you know what I mean? But so, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
That sounds really exciting. Yeah.
You guys are totally on the same wavelength too.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. Yeah, it's cool.
It's a little eerie. Yeah, I like it.
We'll have to have you both back when you do your next books. They'll probably be out at the same time.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So much. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, I saw somebody wrote, Jennifer, you wrote, I cannot wait to read All's Well. Right? Yeah, I know. And congratulations on just turning it in.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Actually, I'll ask you guys. I'm in this kind of weird state. I don't know if this happens to you. I was telling Lauren about it, but I'm curious, Quan, like when you send your book out, when you submit it to your editor, do you feel this kind of weird empty feeling afterwards? Like this kind of like, because I'm feeling that. It's like this kind of sense of like this void, because the book was just like this world that I was living in, and now it's not, it's like gone, you know? Do you know that?
I see Jennifer nodding. So Jennifer, what are your?
Yeah, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I just handed my book in to my editor, and it's really hard. I miss working on it.
Yeah.
And it won't be out until 2022. So, but I miss the poems and the character, and yeah, it's a loss, definitely.
Yeah,
but I'm going to spend a lot of time reading before I start writing something new.
Yeah. I think that's the right way to go about it. I have to prep for classes, so I'm actually kind of scrambling, but that feeling is still kind of there. It's like it's a weird emptiness that I'm not comfortable with, to be honest.
Yeah. Sometimes, you know, I went for a walk with a friend recently, you know, 6-foot walk, like, okay, you stay over there, I'll be over here, right? And we were talking about it because I was saying that for me, I felt like maybe I'm done with poetry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then it turned out I wasn't. But I definitely had like a pretty long period of like months where I thought, you know, I got 4 books. I feel like I'm somebody too, like I really don't like to repeat myself. Like
Yeah.
I try and do very, very different things. And I thought maybe 4 books of poetry is it. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So I know that feeling, you know what I mean? But it's always, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's always changing. You have to remember that.
Yeah.
And you have to refuel also, right?
I was going to say also, remember that this is only a short separation from your book. It will
Right, it's coming back.
boomerang back, and then you're going to revise it again, and the edits and the copy edits, and you're going to be so darn sick of it
Yeah, that's true.
by the time it's ready to, you know? So it's just a short little, it's a reprieve.
It's a reprieve. That's right.
Yeah.
Where I'll read more fairy tales. Yeah. I'm teaching a class on fairy tales next fall for the first time, so I'm excited.
Oh, I wish I could take that class.
Yeah.
I would like to take it. So do you recommend Grimm's, like the original Grimm's fairy tales as the real dark, great originals?
They're really beautiful. They're kind of hard to pass up, I have to say. I've just been reading all these variants of Snow White, and the Brothers Grimm one is incredible. The actually contemporary, the Helen Oyeyemi retelling Boy Snowbird is the best contemporary retelling of Snow White I've ever read. It's so gorgeous. So I love that one. But in terms of the traditional ones, I love the Brothers Grimm. I love Hans Christian Andersen because he's in there. He's in every story. You know, he is the Little Mermaid. It's like, it's heartbreaking when you start seeing that. It's like, it's excruciating. I used to see him as such a misogynist and a sadist, but he's not. He's self-hating. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a heartbreaking thing, but his stories are beautiful. And the French ones are beautiful too. And then if you get more contemporary anthologies, you'll see more global kind of fairy tales, and it's really nice to see those starting to appear in actual anthologies where you have access to them, because we've been kind of missing out on that, I think. Yeah.
Right. I can't wait. I can't wait for all of these projects. You guys are so prolific. So I guess should we wrap up, or are there more questions? What do you want to do, Jennifer?
Well, unless there are any more questions from the audience, and I guess we can thank everyone and
What's happening? Are you
something is falling in the next room and the dog got afraid.
Aw.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Yeah.